Hey folks, Postman Dan here, and I'm talking with Natalia Manzocco from Now Magazine. How are you doing, Nat?
I'm good, man. I'm good. How you doing?
Oh, fantastic. I mean, considering I'm getting pretty used to getting stuck inside, it's okay.
Yeah, this is actually kind of my ideal state in a lot of ways. So that's been fun.
Well, I'm more of a people all the time person, so,
Yeah.
but
Oh yeah, you for sure are. Yeah, it's the introverts and the extroverts. We're having some very different experiences with this whole jam. I think. Yeah.
So I'm super excited to talk to you. I don't think I've really talked to you at all about your work at Now and your journalism. We've mostly just talked music. We've never really talked about this side of things. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew this, but like my two very, very, very favorite things are CIUT and Now Magazine.
Oh, that's so sweet.
And I think as the internet comes in and people talk about, oh, you can just find out about shows on the internet. And I never find it easier to find out about cool things happening on the internet. It's always way easier just to look at it now, in my opinion, to find out what's really happening in the city.
That rules. I'm A lot of people have said that, and it's always nice to hear. Like it's cool working at a thing that's it's been around in the city longer than I've been alive, and you could say that about a lot of newspapers. But I think the thing that sets Now apart is that it's always kind of had that, that artistic events like what's happening in the city bent. It's always kind of had its finger on the pulse, so to speak. And I think that it's really kind of been there for people over the years when they were like young and coming up in the city and wanted this window into what was happening and what to do. So yeah, like it's cool to be a part of that, and it's very nice that you would say that.
So what I wonder now is the alt weeklies. I use them. I travel a lot, and I also find whenever I go anywhere, the first thing I try to find is their local alt weekly, and that gives you an idea what's happening. And there's still a lot of them around, but there's also a lot of them starting to go under. And it seems like, despite the demand, it seems like the demand is still there, but the advertisers don't want to pay for advertising in them anymore. Am I correct in that? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it is across the entirety of print media, which is super unfortunate. There's this little website called Google and this other little website called Facebook, and they basically just chomped the entirety of the ad market. Like people didn't want to, they didn't want to pay for print ads when they could, pay for these digital ads and have control over all these metrics and see how things were performing in real time. And obviously there's something that, a paper that has sort of cultural cachet and, has interesting listings and has like sort of a built-in audience. There are things that can do that digital advertising can't. But yeah, the situation across the whole industry right now is that basically it just advertisers just pulling out en masse, and it started to happen about 2008 with the financial market sort of contracting and contracting. That's how you pronounce that word, contracting.
Right. And so like the money
so
left, and then when the markets
the money
came back, the money didn't.
the money did not. Yeah, and so the entire journalism industry has been just kind of having to make do with less and less and less and less as the years go on, which is a bummer. I don't think I need to tell you it is a huge bummer, and I
Right.
hate it a lot.
And I don't know, like I don't get it myself because I don't feel like when I'm on the computer that I really notice ads. But when something looks cool in a magazine like Now, I might take notice of it, like the restaurant ad or something. I don't know. I don't feel like I notice ads on the internet as much. Usually I'm focused on what I'm doing, whereas when I'm flipping through a newspaper, I'm more sort of relaxing and taking in what I'm reading, you know?
Yeah, I think people have been trying to, there's something about ads on the internet that you just kind of learn to tune out, which of course is not great when you are in a business that survives on ads. Um, yeah.
So I was super interested, and I know like it's been a weird time at Now because I know you guys changed ownership. And we didn't really know nobody knew how that would affect things. And then the COVID crisis hits, which makes it even more difficult to judge how things are going to affect, right? Because I've noticed the magazines have started getting smaller, but that probably would have happened anyways, because basically any advertisers you like the restaurants that still advertise with you guys aren't. Like, what's going on
Yeah.
now with with post COVID in this new world at now?
Well, we've all been hunkered down at our apartments. We've all been doing stuff remotely for the past month and a half. So, I work from home. I remote into my computer. I'm on Slack. I'm on Zoom calls all the time. Once a week, I walk down to Donlan Station and pick up a copy of Now because that's the only place you can get Now right now is in the subway and Go stations because we've basically cut back our print circulation to just the gateway newsstands. We actually just got it back into the subway after being away for many, many years. Like, I've worked for a number of free papers in Toronto. I worked for 24 Hours when we had that. I worked for Metro when we had that. And I've worked at Now. And basically it's like the newspapers sort of like bid to like get that exclusive contract is my understanding. So like they basically, pay to be in the subway so that they can then have access to that captive underground subway readership
That
market.
still
Like when
doesn't
people are,
have internet.
yeah, like there's kind of internet down there, but like it's kind of janky. It works when you're standing on the platform, and then you don't actually get it when you're in the tunnels anymore.
Right.
So yeah, for many, many years, that's been kind of like a way for commuter papers to get distributed. We actually went back into the subway right before all this went down, and I'm sure we're kind of glad that we did because that's the only place where you can get the paper right now is the subway.
I don't know if you would know this or not. Have you noticed, like, so your physical distribution is way down currently? Have you noticed like more people downloading it, or do you have access to that information? Do you know?
More people reading the site?
Like, see, I'm so old fashioned. I get it online, but I read it in Press Reader, so it still looks like the newspaper.
Oh my God, you're like the one guy that uses Press Reader every week. Bless your heart.
Well, I don't.
That's awesome.
Personally, I don't like apps. Like, I subscribe to the Toronto Star as well, and I don't like it in the app because it always buries half the things you can't find half the stuff, and it's like it's always trying to push you to the top content, whereas I like the idea of getting through the whole paper and seeing all the content.
That's cool, man. I feel like you're in the minority, but I always thought Press Reader was cool. Like, it's nice to have Press Reader, and it's especially cool. Sometimes, like, I run the social media feeds, and I haven't had time to do this lately because of everything else that's been happening. But what I used to like to do is go through the Press Reader copy of Now from, like, 30 years before. It was, like, be, like, February, be, like, the week of February 25th, 1990 or whatever, and sort of go through and, like, find little like ads for like the Brunny or like places that had closed down like years before and sort of slap that up on Instagram and be like, remember when this was a thing? And people will be like, oh my God, I haven't seen or heard of that in years. And there's some really cool like ad designs and stuff like that from back in the day too. I feel like the days of like commissioning beautiful original hand done illustrations for advertisements doesn't really exist anymore, which is a bummer because it was cool. But yeah, in terms of online readership, and from what I'm seeing on Twitter, this is actually the case for almost everybody, is that online numbers have increased dramatically for a lot of people. Does that make up for the drop in print sales? I don't know. Like, I'm not really privy to like this, the sales sides of things. I can't really say that.
Right.
But I have seen other people sort of express frustration that they're like, wow, like everyone told us that clicks were the metric and my job is the same, but we're getting way more clicks. So maybe clicks were not the metrics for success after all, Like, it's tough. It's the industry is still trying to figure out a way to right itself, and it's kind of frustrating to watch because, I've been a journalist for 12 years at this point, like I graduated in 2008. So yeah, I've been a full-time journalist and editor for 12 years now, which is very lucky, by the way. Like most of the people that I know have either left the industry and got new careers, or they're freelancing or whatever. And I've been full-time with the exception of like maybe 6 months after Sun Media laid me off when not Post Media, when 24 Hours closed, I got laid off. So anyway, I've been in this industry for a long ass time, is what I wanted to say. And it's frustrating to kind of see so many closures happen and so many shutdowns happen. It's like, when are people going to figure out how we're going to monetize this freaking industry enough that we can just do our jobs, you know?
I mean,
Sucks.
they're starting to figure it out in the music industry, and I figure the same. It's going to happen in the print industry eventually. And I think part of the trick is just that, unfortunately, maybe it's got to get worse before it gets better, and that you have to have, when the content starts to get limited, people will realize what they were paying for.
I mean, I hope so. I hope that, it's hard too. Like, it's hard kind of working at a place that does really local first journalism, local first arts journalism, and kind of, it has a valuable place in people's hearts, right? This sort of small, local independent stuff, people really, I think, look to now as a way to sort of springboard their careers forward. But, I taught a class at Humber, actually, this past semester in arts journalism, and it was sort of tough trying to drill it into these guys' heads that, like, basically you kind of have to go for the stuff that's big enough for people to care, because you now have numbers that you have to hit, and have readership targets you have to hit, and have sales targets you have to hit. And the sad fact is that, like, if you write about somebody that, no one knows about, even if they might be good, even if they might be the next big thing, if no one clicks on it, eventually your ability to justify your own existence gets harder and harder, right? I feel like it's a bummer, and I hate that that's kind of the case, but it feels like media is really not the powerful institution it used to be. It feels like we're all kind of chasing the same dollars as everyone else, so...
Well, I mean, music and art journalism must be tough too, because I know, like, I'm a huge fan of independent and local music, but I still don't read the record reviews very often.
We don't really run a lot of those anymore.
I know that.
Not a lot of people did read them.
And it's
hate
not
to say
that,
it, but it's true.
It's not that I don't want to be interested. It's just hard to keep focused on reading about a band that you're not invested in at all, and you don't really know what they sound like. There's only so much words can describe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's hard too. I think people used to have a bigger appetite for that sort of thing, or maybe we just didn't notice it because we didn't. It's weird now to see, like, to think about going from being a print publication that put stuff in print and send it out into the world and being like, this is a thing that we have decided that people care about, and then going from that to seeing, like, every single page view and every single set of eyeballs laid out in a big ass graph in real time for you to see, right?
As
and it kind of messes with your head.
As opposed to sending out the paper and just, did people buy the paper or did they not?
Or did people pick it up and did they not? I remember we used to, when I first started it now, about 5 years ago, we used to look at the circulation numbers every week. And it would always be this margin of, like, 89% pickup to, like, 94% pickup. And it would sort of, like, waver in that range. And we used to kind of spend all this time analyzing, like, well, single artist covers. Like, if we put one artist on the cover, it doesn't really do well because there's no angle. Or, like, oh, this, food issues always do well, but, like, this politics issue might have... And then after all, we kind of realized that, like, it basically stayed flat, like, week to week. It was like it didn't really matter that much. Like, people were gonna, maybe it was like a couple thousand people that wouldn't pick up the paper based on what was on the cover that week. Pretty much everyone else did. And the sort of metric for success has changed diametrically from, like, are people reading the print product to what are people reading online? How do we, get stuff that's engaging and that people paying attention on online? So it's been a pretty big seismic shift, I think, over the past, like, 5 years. Like, even 5 years is not a long time, but in journalism years, that is an age.
Yeah. So, to get off of the doom and gloom,
right?
I've got three things I want to ask you before we wrap up.
Okay.
One pre-COVID question. I know that you've taken on quite a few roles at Now, but one of your big roles has been the food editor. And I've always thought being doing the restaurant reviews and stuff in a city like Toronto must just be the coolest job. And I'm wondering if you could tell me anything about your experiences doing that. And also, just as a random side question, is there any food that you don't like?
Okay. What do I... All right, I'm going to think about that. To start you off, I mean, yeah, it's funny. I feel like the food editor job, if we're going to get in our feelings here for a second, I think for a long time I sort of felt like I didn't really have a good handle on it. It came with time. But for a long time, like, I had come into the job not long after Stephen Davey, the guy who had, been the food writer for years and years and years, had at Now, who was like this, icon of, the local sort of food writing scene, had passed away. And there was maybe a year, I think, between, like, there was another guy who had the job prior to me for a year, and then I got hired on. And it kind of freaked me out a little bit because I had already done some of that at BlogTO when I was there for about a year. But it felt so vast and so complicated, and I felt so new kind of coming to it. And there was such fierce competition to get to stories that I think for a long time I didn't really feel like I was sort of thriving in it, to be perfectly honest. Now it's just like, oh man, remember when that was my biggest concern? Not that, like, there's a freaking global pandemic and there's 48 stories happening during the day and that we have to cover. But it's been fun. I think that the thing that kind of got me to sort of loosen, my iron grip on the handlebars is the thought that, like, the best part of the job is not the free food. Like, people kind of always go like, oh my god, like, you eat for free, holy shit, so glamorous, wow. And, like, if you do anything for a job, it ceases to be glamorous after a while. It doesn't matter what it is. But the thing that kind of really got me going about it was the fact that you got to talk to people about their life's passion and their life's work. Because being in the food industry is not for the faint of heart. It's a very difficult industry to make it in, and it requires, a total commitment. Your entire life gets sunk into this. And so when you talk to people, like as a journalist, as an interviewer, as a writer, when you kind of hit on that one thing that really makes somebody tick, and that one thing where they're like, oh my god, like, my entire feelings about, like, my hometown are tied up in this restaurant, or like, this is the story of my family, or this is the story of, like, my life's struggle, like, long nights, slaving away over the hot stove, and then, finally it all comes together. As a storyteller, as somebody who lives for a good quote, you're like, yes, that is it. And also, doing food photography, I really miss a lot. Like, that is something that I taught myself to do on the job. I didn't really think I could do it, but they were like, you can take your own photos, right? And I was like, yeah, totally, that's the thing I know how to do. And then, like, blew the dust off of my camera. And,
you've definitely enticed me to go to more than one restaurant with your photography.
I appreciate that. I've had a couple of, like, there was one guy who, like, emailed one day who was, like, really salty, who was just like, I can't believe that you would, like, allow Natalia Manzocco to go to these restaurants and, like, besmirch their menus with her photography. And he was like, you should hire me instead. Except the only person that email went to was me. Like, I'm the person who answers the food inbox. And I was like, I don't think I will be doing that, sir. Every now and again you get those, and it's like, no, my food photos they're definitely, like, at least a 7 out of 10, and you can calm down. So that's been great. And yeah, that's one of the things I kind of miss, because, like, there's never any shortage of news, especially now. Like, I had someone try to email me a pitch the other day, and they're like, I know it's a slow news month right now, and I was like, are you what are these English words you're saying to me?
Well, I mean, I guess for some people it is there's tons of news, but it's all on the same thing. So I feel like there is content missing, but everything's getting thinner too, right? Like, whether it's you guys or the Toronto Star, like, everything I read, like, there is, like, the sports section's pretty well gone, like, everything's pretty well gone in the newspaper. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Even at now, stage and music have both been put on hold indefinitely because there's virtually no stage or music stuff to cover. There's a little bit, but also, we've been beefing up new categories at Now. I'm not sure if you noticed, but there's been a lot more health, a lot more education, a lot more tech stuff, a lot more finance stuff, and this is all stuff we didn't do before. And so our writers that normally work on stage and music have been put on that. And, you know, I don't know what our coverage is going to look like once things come back, right? Yeah, it's, I think it's one of these things where, yeah, everyone's kind of had to adapt in ways that I don't think they could have predicted. But to go back to your earlier question, I will eat pretty much anything. There are a couple things that are kind of like iffy for me. A lot of it depends on preparation. I don't love big hunks of raw tomato. I like the seaweed on the inside of my sushi and not the outside because it's like a texture thing. But also sometimes I've had like really good seaweed from like a really good sushi restaurant and then it's okay. So maybe they're just like using like janky over dried seaweed that's not very good. Really like super chewy things, you know, like tripe. I'm not huge into, but I'll eat pretty much like I'll eat anything once.
Right.
I'll try anything.
Sorry. Have you ever? I'll just finish that cop now. Have you ever went to review something and then felt like you couldn't review it because you didn't feel like you were able to appreciate it the way it should be?
Sometimes. Yeah. There have been times where I've kind of been like, I don't know if I'm the guy to write about this because maybe I'm not, you know, I don't have the background to like really know it inside out to pass judgment. Like that usually springs up with things like best of lists. I have made the mistake in the past of writing best of lists I was not qualified to write and I got my ass handed to me on the internet and now I'm very careful about that stuff.
Right.
I mean it's not a good service to the reader, right? Like if I'm writing about something and I'm sort of making representations that I know what I'm talking about when I don't, then they're going to be like, well, this sucks, and then they're not going to come back. So sometimes, you know, I'll maybe interview people who really like, one example is like Caribbean food. There's so much Caribbean food in the city, it's delicious, but I haven't eaten enough of it to be like, yeah, I know where all the good shit is. So in that case, maybe I would call up some people who do know and like get quotes from them and sort of put together a guide that way. Or like we did a thing on halal food. I do not eat halal, but we had a freelancer who was awesome come in and do a whole guide on that, and it was great. So yeah, I think a lot of it is about just like knowing your lane and just trying to like stay in it as much as possible.
Sure. Okay, but let's change lanes.
All right.
Change lanes or turn around. So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned before we started recording, you guys are working on a new podcast. Do you want to talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have a podcast now. We started it maybe like a month or so ago. It's called Now What, which I think is a great title. It's hosted by Norm Wilner, who is our film writer, and who also hosts Someone Else's Movie, which is quite a popular like movie podcast where he has like film people come on and talk about a movie, but it can't be their movie. It has to be some other movie that they like. So he's got like a ton of experience doing these things. And so I've been lucky enough to be on a couple times. It's been pretty fun. They're short little episodes. They're like, 25, 30 minutes. So, you're not going to take a whole bunch of time out of your day listening to it. And he had Emily Hampshire from Schitt's Creek on last week. I was on today's with our beer writer and drinks writer, Robin LeBlanc, talking about how bars are coping with the shutdown. So, it's been cool, and I think it's only going to get better and better as we keep going. So if you're looking for new podcasts to listen to, you know where to find us. It's on the internet.
Will we find
Now
it?
Magazine. No, nowtoronto.com. Shit.
Nowtoronto.com.
Nowtoronto.com. I have actually almost typed in, like, why aren't you email, like, people, people call the office sometimes, and I'm like one of those gremlins that, like, wants to be left in my hovel of a desk and not talk to people on the phone. And it's like, why aren't you calling me at nowmagazine.com? Wait a minute. I can't even get, that's not correct.
So,
my moral high ground is gone.
Is it up on? Is it going to be anywhere that we look for podcasts, or is it exclusive?
No, it is on Apple. It's on Podbean. It's on all the major services. It's broadcast pretty widely.
But if you want to go straight to the source, it's nowtoronto.com.
It is.
Very good.
It is.
Okay, Nat. Well, I think we should probably finish things up here, but this has been a fun chat.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you for having me.
the last question I'm gonna ask you is I'm gonna ask you to pick something fresh, something local, something cool for me to play.
Yeah, so keeping with the Now Magazine theme, Jesse Locke, who writes for us sometimes at Now, plays in a band called Motorists. They're really fun. I started a band a couple years ago called Weak Hands, and we played a show with them. We actually had a whole bunch of cool stuff planned, and like we were supposed to record the weekend that the shutdown happened.
Ugh.
We were literally supposed to record the weekend that they told us all to stay home, and it was so upsetting. So while you're waiting with bated breath for the Weekends record to get made, you can listen to Motorists. They put out an EP last month. It's delightful, and I think you should play a song called Honey is Flowing in All Directions, because I was listening to it today, and it's a bop.
All right, we're gonna get to that now. Motorists on CIUT 89.5 FM, the sound of your city.
I miss doing that.
Good. Okay.